humid air of the late Cretaceous hangs heavy over the coastal swamps of what we now call Texas and Montana. Imagine a landscape where the horizon is a blur of giant ferns and towering conifers, and the ground beneath your feet is a saturated, muddy sponge. To the untrained eye, the water's surface is a mirror broken only by the occasional ripple of a prehistoric dragonfly. But beneath that stillness lies a predator that has redefined the meaning of patience. This is the world of Deinosuchus, the terrible crocodile. For nearly a century, our understanding of this beast was as murky as the waters it inhabited. In 1858, the first clues emerged not as a skeleton, but as massive, blunt teeth discovered by geologist Ebenezer Emmons. At first, they were thought to belong to a dinosaur. It wasn't until the 1940s, when a fossil hunting expedition from the American Museum of Natural History uncovered a massive jawbone, that the truth began to surface. This wasn't a dinosaur at all. It was a giant alligatoroid, a lineage that split from modern alligators over 80 million years ago. In this first chapter, we look at the environment that birthed such a titan. The Deinosuchus didn't just live in the swamp, it dominated it through a slow burn strategy. Unlike the fast-burning metabolism of the theropod dinosaurs roaming the plains, the Deinosuchus was a creature of longevity. Recent studies of its osteoderms, those bony plates on its back, reveal growth rings similar to those of a tree. They suggest that these giants didn't grow fast, they just didn't stop growing. While a T-Rex might reach maturity in 2 decades, a Deinosuchus spent 50 years reaching its full, terrifying potential. As the sun sets over the Cretaceous bayou, a herd of duck-billed hadrosaurs cautiously approaches the water's edge to drink. They scan the trees for predators, but they ignore the mossy log floating 10 feet away. In this ecosystem, the greatest threat isn't the one roaring in the forest, it's the shadow in the swamp that hasn't moved in hours. This is the introduction to a predator that saw the rise and fall of countless dinosaur species, while remaining the undisputed master of the water's edge. The story of Deinosuchus begins here, in the silence of the hunt. To understand the true scale of Deinosuchus, you have to look past the surface of the water and into the mechanics of a biological machine designed for absolute power. For decades, paleontologists struggled with a giant puzzle. They had massive teeth and fragments of jawbones, but a complete skeleton remained elusive. It wasn't until researchers began comparing these fragments to modern alligators that the staggering reality set in. We aren't just talking about a large crocodile. We are talking about an animal that stretched the very limits of what a semi-aquatic predator could be. Imagine a creature nearly 40 feet long. To put that in perspective, if a Deinosuchus walked down a modern city street, its body would occupy the length of a standard shipping container, and its head alone would be the size of a grown man. Weighing in at over 8 tons, it was heavier than a modern African elephant and nearly as heavy as the largest Tyrannosaurus rex. But the real terror lay in its bite. By analyzing the musculature of the skull and the thickness of the jawbone, scientists estimated a bite force of approximately 100,000 newtons. That is twice the crushing power of a T-Rex and 30 times more powerful than a great white shark. The physical build of Deinosuchus was a masterclass in prehistoric engineering. Its back was covered in massive bulbous osteoderms, bony plates that acted as a suit of heavy armor. These weren't just for protection, they served as anchors for the massive muscles required to move such a colossal body through the water and to perform the legendary death roll. Interestingly, while its snout was broad like an alligator's, the tip of its nose featured a strange bulbous hollow called a premaxillary fossa. While its exact purpose is debated, some believe it helped the giant resonate sound or served as a specialized sensory organ to detect the slightest vibrations of a dinosaur stepping into the water miles away. This chapter explores the scaling of the giant, looking at how this creature grew for over 50 years to reach these impossible dimensions. It was a predator that lived in slow motion, but struck with the speed of a lightning bolt. When we scale the Deinosuchus, we aren't just measuring bone and muscle. We are measuring the undisputed heavyweight champion of the Cretaceous waterways, a titan that made even the king of the dinosaurs look like a secondary character in the story of life. For a long time, the scientific community believed that Deinosuchus was merely a giant scavenger or a consumer of ancient sea turtles. Its massive, blunt teeth seemed perfect for crushing shells, and its habitat was teeming with slow-moving aquatic prey. But as more fossils were unearthed across the American West, a much darker and more violent picture began to emerge. This wasn't just a turtle crusher. This was the ultimate ambush predator of the Cretaceous, a beast that regularly took down the most famous land dwellers of its time. The smoking gun came in the form of fossilized hadrosaur vertebrae. These duck-billed dinosaurs were the cattle of the Cretaceous, weighing several tons and roaming in massive herds. On several specimens found in the Agulla Formation of Texas, paleontologists discovered deep, unmistakable puncture wounds in the tailbones. The spacing of these holes didn't match the blade-like teeth of a Tyrannosaurus or an Albertosaurus. Instead, they matched the massive, peg-like daggers of a Deinosuchus. Even more chilling was the evidence of healing on some of these bones, suggesting that these dinosaurs had been attacked at the water's edge, dragged toward the depths, and somehow managed to break free from the most powerful grip in evolutionary history. Imagine the scene. A herd of hadrosaurs, parched from a long trek across the sun-scorched plains, approaches a seemingly peaceful river. They are wary of the forest behind them, where theropods might be lurking. They don't notice the moss-covered log floating just inches below the surface. In a fraction of a second, the water explodes. The Deinosuchus doesn't just bite, it launches its 8-ton body forward with a burst of its powerful tail. It clamps onto the dinosaur's snout or leg with 100,000 newtons of force, enough to snap bone like dry kindling. Once the grip was secure, the Deinosuchus utilized the death roll, a terrifying maneuver used by modern crocodiles, but amplified to a catastrophic scale. By spinning its massive body, it used its own weight and momentum to tear limbs from sockets and drag the struggling dinosaur into the deep, murky water where the land dweller was helpless. This chapter explores how Deinosuchus occupied a unique niche, a predator that lived in the water but fed on the land. It was the gatekeeper of the watering hole, a monster that turned the most basic necessity of life, a drink of water, into a lethal gamble for every dinosaur in the late Cretaceous. To understand the world of Deinosuchus, you have to look at a map of North America that no longer exists. 75 million years ago, the continent was physically split in two by a massive, shallow body of water known as the Western Interior Seaway. This vast ocean stretched from the Gulf of Mexico all the way to the Arctic, effectively carving the land into two distinct island continents, Laramidia to the west and Appalachia to the east. It was a world of shifting coastlines, sprawling river deltas, and brackish lagoons, and it was the perfect playground for a giant crocodilian. The fossil record reveals a fascinating mystery. Deinosuchus didn't just inhabit one side of this divide, it ruled both. However, the populations on either side of the seaway tell two different stories. In the west, along the shores of Laramidia, what we now call Montana, Utah, and Texas, the Deinosuchus reached its truly monstrous proportions. These were the giants that rivaled the Tyrannosaurus rex in weight and length. In the east, in Appalachia, areas like North Carolina and Georgia, their remains are more numerous but slightly smaller. Scientists believe this divide created a fascinating evolutionary experiment, with different environmental pressures shaping the populations on either side of the Great Water Barrier. This chapter explores how the Western Interior Seaway acted as a conveyor belt for the Deinosuchus diet. They were the masters of the ecotone, the transition zone where the land meets the sea. Because they could tolerate brackish water, they moved freely between freshwater rivers and the saltwater coast. They weren't just waiting for dinosaurs to come for a drink. They were also patrolling the coastlines for giant sea turtles and perhaps even smaller marine reptiles. They occupied a niche that no dinosaur could fill, acting as the ultimate bridge between the terrestrial and marine food chains. Imagine a world where the coastlines were a no-man's land. For a dinosaur, crossing a river or approaching the sea wasn't just a matter of navigation, it was a life-or-death gamble. The Deinosuchus was the gatekeeper of this divided world, a predator that thrived in the margins and turned the geography of a continent into its personal hunting ground. They were the silent sentinels of the seaway, proving that while dinosaurs may have owned the land, the Deinosuchus owned the very borders of the world. The reign of the Deinosuchus eventually came to an end, but not with a whimper. Long before the infamous asteroid struck the Yucatan Peninsula, the world was already shifting. The great Western Interior Seaway began to recede, draining away the brackish lagoons and sprawling deltas that these giants called home. As their specialized habitat vanished, the terrible crocodile faded from the fossil record, leaving behind a legacy that continues to challenge our understanding of prehistoric life. It serves as a humbling reminder that during the age of the terrible lizards, the most dangerous creature on the continent wasn't a dinosaur at all. The legacy of Deinosuchus lives on in the very shape of the modern world. When you look at a modern American alligator or a saltwater crocodile, you are looking at a blueprint that has remained largely unchanged for tens of millions of years. Evolution hit a gold standard with the crocodilian form, low profile, immense power, and a semi-aquatic lifestyle, and Deinosuchus was the absolute peak of that design. It proved that a cold-blooded strategy wasn't a disadvantage, it was a survival tactic that allowed them to outlast many of the warm-blooded giants they once hunted. In the final chapter of our story, we look at the modern discoveries that keep the Deinosuchus legend alive. From the dusty badlands of Montana to the riverbanks of Georgia, new fragments of bone and teeth continue to emerge, each one adding a new layer to the mystery. Modern CT scanning and biomechanical modeling have allowed us to hear the potential low-frequency bellows they might have used to communicate across the swamps, and to visualize the sheer torque of their death rolls. They weren't just big lizards, they were complex, social, and highly adapted apex predators that sat at the very top of the food chain. The story of Deinosuchus is a testament to the power of the water's edge. It reminds us that history is often written by the survivors, and while the dinosaurs are gone, the lineage of the giant crocodilians remains. They are the ultimate success story of deep time. As we close this 50-minute journey into the Cretaceous, we leave the swamp not with a sense of fear, but with a profound respect for the shadow in the water, the creature that looked at a Tyrannosaurus rex not as a king, but as a meal. The Deinosuchus remains, forever, the undisputed titan of the prehistoric bayou.